"If the credit passes, I'll give you triple," sneered the manager. It was the bank's black CEO. Naomi Ellison, newly appointed CEO of one of the country's largest banks, decides to enter a branch as a regular customer without revealing her true identity. Dressed in simple clothes and with a discreet gaze, she wants to observe firsthand how employees treat people who don't appear wealthy or prestigious. What seemed like a quiet visit quickly turns into a tense moment when her humble demeanor draws the contempt of those who should be welcoming her. Faced with arrogance and injustice, Naomi faces public humiliations that could bring anyone down. But her dignity, combined with the unexpected support of someone who crosses her path, transforms her pain into strength. From then on, what happens inside that agency changes not only her life, but also the lives of everyone around her. Before we begin today's story, I want to extend a special invitation. Comment here where you're watching from. I love hearing where our stories are going. And if you enjoy plots full of emotion, romance, and overcoming obstacles, please subscribe to the channel. This way, you'll help this space grow and ensure you don't miss any of the upcoming stories. The mirrored glass of the Michigan Avenue branch reflects Naomi Ellison before she even steps into the lobby. At 37, with deep, chocolate-toned dark skin, she ties her curly hair in a tight, elegant bun, leaving her face free and serene, and wears a gray wool jacket, dark jeans, and clean but simple sneakers. Nothing about her appearance betrays that she is the newly appointed CEO of her own bank. Only her dark brown eyes, attentive and perceptive, reveal the intention behind her visit: to silently observe how ordinary customers are welcomed. The air inside smells of freshly brewed coffee and paper money. Low background music attempts to soften the typical tension of a downtown Chicago bank. At the counter, 3 tellers work at different paces. A young Latina woman checks documents while smiling laboriously. A tall young man types impatiently, tapping his finger on the keyboard. A middle-aged woman organizes stacks of forms with precision. The security guard, a burly man in a navy blue coat with a weary look, alternates his attention between the door and the lines snaking through the lobby. Screens overhead display corporate videos about inclusion, opportunity, and merit. Naomi raises an eyebrow discreetly. She knows from experience that generous slogans sometimes don't translate into practice. She takes a number from the electronic kiosk. The number flashes on the distant display. Beside it, a board with colorful brochures promises fair rates, affordable credit, and friendly service. Naomi watches the line. A war veteran in an embroidered cap adjusts his posture, taking a deep breath as if calculating each minute. A single mother, dark-skinned and tired-eyed, adjusts the coat of her young daughter, who plays with the number ribbon. A young man with a delivery backpack whispers the words he will say when he reaches the counter. American life, in all its haste and hardship, is there. A receptionist, her badge gleaming under the white light, approaches Naomi with a formal smile. The woman has fair skin, hair tied in a ponytail, and a blazer that's a little too big for her shoulders. "Good morning. Can I help you with anything specific?" Naomi smiles back sweetly. "I just need to settle a payment and ask a question about my card." The receptionist nods, maintaining her usual cordiality. "Perfect. As soon as they call your PIN, the cashier will be able to guide you." Her voice is polite, but slightly mechanical, as if she's already said the same thing 50 times that morning. Naomi chooses a corner chair where she can see the entire agency. She sits upright, hands on her small, simple bag. She observes slowly. The receptionist changes her tone when an elegant client walks through the door with a designer bag and structured blazer. "Good morning. May I direct you directly to priority service?" Naomi notices the contrast and takes a deep breath, keeping her expression neutral. She's not there to be caught up in immediate emotions. She's there to observe patterns. A low argument echoes a few meters away. The young delivery man, with brown skin and a worn jacket, tries to understand a fee. But they told me on the phone there would be no charge. The tall cashier answers without looking up. It's in the system. Next. The young man insists, his voice trembling with frustration. The middle-aged woman, 2 windows away, looks up from her paperwork and calls out, "If you'd like, I can check the protocol notes." Relief crosses the young man's face like a ray of winter sunshine. Naomi remembers both behaviors, impatience that denies and attention that welcomes. The panel beeps. Naomi's password remains distant. She adjusts her bun, pulls out her phone, and discreetly opens a notepad. She types short sentences, like field notes. Differentiation in pre-service. Tone of voice varies with appearance. Rigid interpretation of policy. An employee with genuine empathy. Her finger hovers over the screen for a moment. The memory of her own journey to this point, daughter of a teacher and a bus driver, scholarships, study nights, meetings where her voice was the last one heard, pierces her chest. She closes her eyes for a second, reconnecting with the intention of transforming the experience of those without a famous surname or a tailored suit. A child lets out a soft cry, interrupted by a mint offered by an older employee. "It's okay, honey. We'll get it done quickly." Naomi notices the delicacy of the gestures, the small, essential care that, when combined, changes someone's day. At the same time, she notices how an upper-floor manager crosses the lobby with long strides, a well-cut suit, his gaze sweeping the space. He pauses when he sees the designer bag customer and greets her enthusiastically. "It's so nice to see you again. The premium consultant is waiting for you." The same welcome doesn't extend to the veteran, who remains standing, his briefcase clutched to his chest. The metallic voice from the panel calls out the code before Naomi's. The security guard shifts his weight from one leg to the other, looks at his watch, and sighs. A chilly wind rushes in as the automatic door opens. People often carry the Chicago winter with them. Naomi breathes in, enjoying the city's energy even when it scratches. When the city is tough, it's the service that needs to be soft, she thinks, remembering a phrase she heard from her mother. She writes it down. "Can I direct someone with a card question to counter 3? asks the receptionist at the counter. The middle-aged woman nods. "Send it on." Naomi notices the employee's sincere smile and the slight forward lean, a posture of someone eager to understand. Attention is a language. She notes that too. Naomi's password finally appears on the panel. She calmly stands up, adjusts her bag strap, and crosses the lobby without showing off her presence. She walks with measured steps, each movement controlled, like a pianist who knows the score and waits for the exact moment to hit the highest note. As she advances, she catches the eye of the young delivery man, who now smiles gratefully at the woman at the counter who reviewed her case. "Thank you very much." The employee responds, "You deserve to be treated clearly. Come back if you need it." Naomi feels a twinge of pride in that attitude, which doesn't depend on position, only on character. She arrives at the designated counter and sets down her bag. The kind-faced clerk greets her. "Good morning." "How can I help you?" Naomi returns a discreet smile. "I have a payment to make and a question about my credit card." The voice is calm, cadenced, a low melody. The clerk pulls out the keyboard and approaches. "Sure, let's get this sorted." Naomi notices out of the corner of her eye. A more abrupt movement at the side of the lobby. The newly arrived floor manager is observing the line with a look that mixes control and impatience. He seems to be measuring people like someone who measures risks, not stories. Naomi hands over the card, carefully maintaining a casual, non-performative gesture. Thank you. While the employee checks the screen, Naomi goes back to scanning the room. The institutional screens continue to display commitments to racial inclusion, respect for customers, and valuing diversity. She feels the weight of these words. She knows that today is not just a visit, it's a moral barometer. The branch, in that moment, is a reflection of the culture of the bank, the city, and Dakan, to some extent, the country. The clerk looks up. It'll be credit, right? Naomi nods. Credit. The next minute seems like a routine. A card, a machine, a beep confirming a transaction. But Naomi senses that routine, in places where care and awareness are lacking, is often the stage for the greatest injustices. She takes a deep breath, her expression unchanged. She's ready to see what the routine will reveal. The card machine hadn't even beeped when a woody scent filled the air. Steady steps, shiny soles, a perfectly tailored navy suit, and a burgundy tie with a microprint. Richard Coleman appeared beside the counter as if staking his claim. 45 years old, with fair skin slightly reddish, a chin marked by a close-cropped beard, gray hair slicked back with precision, and a gaze trained to size people up before listening to them. His eyes ran over Naomi. Simple wool jacket, dark jeans, clean but discreet sneakers, a neat bun. A silent judgment settled before the first word. Is there a problem here? He asked, his smile tight and tight. The kindly-faced clerk looked up. Moi, I'm helping a customer with a credit card payment and a question about her card. Richard rested his fingers on the counter, his wedding ring glinting in the white light. Credit card? Right. He shifted his gaze to Naomi, his voice dripping with cold formality. May I see a photo ID, please? Naomi remained calm. Of course. She pulled her small wallet from her purse and presented her ID. The clerk had already begun processing the transaction, but Richard rested his hand on the keyboard, imposing a pause. We'll go step by step. We have protocols. Lately, some cards have situations. The word hovered, chosen to avoid any explicit accusation. Naomi sensed the outline of prejudice behind the politeness. I understand the protocols, he said in a calm, measured tone. I just need to make the payment and clarify a charge. Richard scrutinized the ID for too long, as if searching for an invisible flaw. Updated address? Naomi nodded. Updated. Employment? He asked the question as if testing the waters. Financial sector. Ah. The sound was brief, somewhere between recognition and disguised skepticism. He handed the document back with controlled movement. Here's what we'll do. Before proceeding with the credit, I'm going to ask you to wait. Our system is sensitive today. I'll validate it manually. The kind employee ventured, Mr. Coleman, the system is normal. I can conclude. He didn't even look at her. Thank you, Megan. I'll take care of it. The change in tone was subtle, but cutting. Megan moved back a few millimeters in her chair, without turning her head. Naomi noticed the gesture and felt the weight of that, I'll take care of it, that had once meant so much, I suspect. Richard clicked on the screen with calculated calm. Could you confirm the current limit for me? Naomi replied. I'd rather the system indicate it. He inclined his head, a smirk on the corner of his mouth. Sure. It's just that sometimes When the client isn't familiar with the limits, unnecessary constraints arise. The smile remained, but the air in the agency cooled a degree. A beep from the panel broke the silence for a second. Nearby, a client in a structured blazer and designer bag appeared. Richard immediately signaled to an attendant, "Premium service, please, room 2. The gesture was quick, automatic, like opening a door for someone who already has the key. Back to Naomi. His voice returned to its studied smoothness. "Can we confirm your income over the phone? It's pretty quick." Naomi took a deep breath. "If necessary, yes. But I haven't been asked the other times." "Yeah," he said. "Every case is different." The cliché sounded like a stamp for convenient exceptions. Megan tried to get the flow back on track. "If you prefer, I can process it here." "The line is working, and—" Richard raised his index finger, politely interrupting. "Let's avoid any errors. I'll run an additional check." He accessed another screen, typing precisely, his pace deliberately slow. Naomi glanced at his wristwatch, the second hand ticking unhurriedly, a luxury of time the clients in front of him didn't have. Lucas Whitford, who was waiting a few windows away, leaned forward slightly to take in the scene. He recognized Naomi's posture, a calm one sculpted by the habit of resisting without fuss. His blue eyes narrowed with contained indignation when he heard Richard say, "You know how it is. When you use a credit card, sometimes the machine doesn't cooperate. Debit is usually more secure." Naomi replied gently but firmly, "I want credit." The echo of the word lingered on the counter. Richard smiled again, a smile that seemed rehearsed in training rooms where empathy is a slide, not a practical one. "No problem. I just ask for your patience. The system is finicky with some profiles." He didn't explain which profiles. There was no need. Naomi caught a glimpse of the veteran in the embroidered cap still waiting, while the client from room 2 was already leaving with a handshake, a metal card, and promises to call me directly if you need anything. Richard took Naomi's card with 2 fingers, as if handling an item he didn't want to scratch. "Let's try this. First, internal validation, then, if it's not too much trouble, a smaller value test, just to avoid discomfort." Naomi held his gaze. "I do what I asked." The tone didn't rise. It settled. Megan exhaled, almost imperceptibly, as if given permission to believe a client knew her own way. The manager tapped the card on the machine, removed it before the beep, replaced it, waited, tapped his fingernail on the counter impatiently. "Curious, you're thinking." He turned the monitor slightly away from Naomi, a subtle barrier between information and law. "Maybe it's the network." "It happens when the limit is adjusted." She responded without blinking. "My limit is adequate." "Sure," he replied, and the words sounded like, "We'll see." An elderly woman in the background asked for help understanding a tax. Richard pointed, without looking, to another employee. "Eduardo, please." His hand returned to the keyboard, his expression intent as if conducting a historical audit. Lucas stepped aside, getting close enough to be heard if necessary, but still respecting the distance. Naomi felt his presence, like silent support. "Here's what we'll do," Richard said with fatherly didacticism. "If you prefer debit, the transaction will be processed immediately. It avoids the possibility of embarrassment." Naomi placed her palm on the counter, weakly, bondina, but with intention. "I don't fear embarrassment. I fear injustice." He raised his eyebrows, his cordial mask showing a crack. "We don't deal in injustice, ma'am." "Good," she said, then proceed." Megan straightened her posture, as if that brief exchange had shifted the axis of the room. The security guard at the door swiveled and glanced at the trio, assessing whether the tension required posture. Nothing out of the ordinary, just the kind of friction that doesn't knock over chairs, but does demolish trust. Richard took a deep breath and, for the first time, stared at Naomi for a full second, without flinching from the contact. There was a silent confrontation. On one side, the usual authority of someone who sets the pace. On the other, the quiet dignity of someone who refuses to be diminished. He replaced the card, this time with the technical care he had previously denied. Very well. "Credit card transaction." The hint of his smile reappeared, now with a glint of challenge. "If it passes, excellent. If not, I have alternatives." He inclined his head slightly, his voice lowering half a tone, as if confiding to the audience, "It usually doesn't pass." Megan looked at Naomi, her eyes searching for guidance. Naomi responded with a barely perceptible nod. She stood firm, serene, rooted to the asphalt. The machine's beep still didn't come. In the lobby, the ambient music seemed to fade. Footsteps grew louder. The veteran clutched the folder to his chest. Lucas held his breath reflexively. Richard held the card, his fingers still, his gaze poised for the small victory of his foresight. Naomi held the silence like someone holding a long note at the piano. And something in the air announced that the routine, in that moment, was about to reveal everything that matters when no one is looking. The silence that hung over the branch was dense, as if all the everyday sounds, the clink of coins in the adjacent cash register, the rustle of papers, the barely audible background music, had been sucked into the tension building at Naomi's counter. The card was inserted into the machine, the light flashing red, when Richard Coleman leaned forward, resting both broad hands on the counter. His smile wasn't one of cordiality, but of provocation. "If you pass the credit, I'll give you triple," he said, raising his voice enough for every person in line to catch the phrase. The laughter came soon after, deep, calculated. A laugh born not of joy, but of the need to reinforce power. It was like a hammer blow of derision in the room. Megan, the employee, swallowed hard and lowered her eyes to the keyboard, as if she wanted to disappear. Naomi remained motionless, her hands resting on her simple purse, her gaze fixed firmly on the manager. A few customers exchanged glances. The single mother hugged her young daughter tightly, trying to distract her with a makeshift toy. The veteran in the embroidered cap frowned and sat up straight in his chair, indignant but lacking the courage to intervene. And Lucas Whitford, a few booths away, felt his blood pound in his temples. He took a discreet step, getting close enough to hear every word. Richard didn't stop. "It's just a joke," he said, raising an eyebrow, as if to soften the impact of his own cruelty. "No need to be tense, ma'am, but I've seen plenty of situations where the card fails. Better get your wallet ready, right?" Another laugh, this time more restrained, escaped the corners of his mouth. Naomi took a deep breath, filling her chest with air, maintaining her dignity as her only armor. "I don't usually joke about serious things," she replied, her tone low and serene, but carrying an invisible weight. "Oh, don't get me wrong," Richard replied, twirling the card between his fingers as if it were just an ownerless object. "It's just that sometimes we need a sense of humor to deal with unexpected events. Especially when the line is unclear." The sentence fell like a sharp knife. The line moved silently. Every customer felt the discomfort of this public humiliation. Naomi noticed the curious eyes, some filled with pity, others with judgment. And for a moment, She felt a flashback to her youth in poor neighborhoods, when every achievement was measured by the discredit of others. But she didn't let her weakness show. Lucas couldn't take it anymore and intervened, his voice firm but respectful. "I don't think it's appropriate, Mr. Coleman, to joke about situations involving customers. Everyone deserves respect." Richard slowly turned his head, staring at Lucas with disdain. "And who are you to give etiquette lessons behind my counter?" Naomi held up her hand, signaling Lucas not to press the issue. "Don't worry," she said, meeting his gaze briefly with gratitude in her eyes. "Some masks fall off on their own." Richard laughed again, but it sounded forced. "Then we'll see. If the card goes through, I'll honor my word. I'll give you triple the amount. What do you say? Want to take a chance?" "It's not a bet," Naomi replied, keeping her voice controlled. "It's only my right." The manager leaned even closer, as if to dominate the space. Then let's find out together." He inserted the card into the machine with an almost theatrical click, looking at the line as if summoning the audience for a show. The panel glowed blue, beginning the scan. At that moment, everyone seemed to hold their breath. The single mother's daughter stopped playing and stared at the scene. The veteran crossed his arms, as if awaiting a verdict. Lucas discreetly clenched his fists. Naomi stood erect, her gaze fixed on the machine's display, her heart racing but her posture unwavering. It was as if she were standing before a silent tribunal, where every second of waiting was a judgment not on her credit, but on her dignity. The machine still didn't beep. The light blinked, taking longer than usual. Richard smiled confidently. "See? Luck isn't always on our side." Naomi, without looking away, replied firmly, "Dignity doesn't depend on luck. It depends on character." The sentence reverberated in the air, leaving a sharp tension. Eyes returned to the camera's display, where the fate of that scene seemed about to unfold. The machine continued to linger, the blue light wavering like an indecisive heart. Richard smiled, confident that the embarrassment would stretch until it turned into public defeat. Naomi, however, did not give in. Her hands, resting on her bag, trembled slightly, a physical reflex impossible to control. But her face remained erect, her chin raised, her eyes fixed on the machine's display. It was the silence of someone who carries centuries of distrust on their shoulders but has learned to endure in silence. Richard's muffled chuckle echoed again. "That's what I said. Sometimes it takes time, and that time speaks for itself." The provocation was accompanied by a sideways glance at the line, as if seeking complicity from the spectators. No one responded, but everyone felt the weight. The single mother lowered her eyes so as not to expose her daughter to the venom of that irony. The veteran in the cap clenched his fists on the folder, his knuckles white. Megan, the employee, discreetly bit her lip, torn between the duty to remain silent and the urge to defend herself. It was into this void that Lucas Whitford appeared. Tall, athletic, with a natural leadership posture, he hadn't taken his eyes off the scene from the start. His blue eyes now gleamed with indignation. He walked slowly to stand near the counter, not crossing the line of respect, but close enough for Naomi to feel his silent support. "Excuse me," he said, his voice clear and firm. "No, I don't think that kind of comment should be part of a banking experience." Richard turned away, with that half-smile he always used to diffuse criticism. "Sir, don't worry. It was just a joke. I need to keep a good mood in my department, you know? Everyone here knows how to handle it." Lucas held her gaze. "I don't see the humor in humiliating someone in front of strangers." Naomi took a deep breath, stopping any harsher response that might have emerged. "It's okay," she said, turning her eyes to Lucas. Thank you for your concern." Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it held firmness. She then turned to Richard. "You've made your point clear. Now let the machine do the talking." The silence that followed was suffocating. The expected beep still hadn't come, and each second seemed to stretch out like an eternity. Naomi maintained her posture, but her fingers discreetly tightened on the edge of her bag, as if transferring all the tension she didn't show on her face to it. Richard arched an eyebrow, capitalizing on that moment of invisible fragility. It's amazing how some customers are so bothered by simple checks. If you had more confidence in your own credit, there would be no reason to be nervous. That sentence was a low blow. Megan looked up and stared at the manager, surprised by his boldness. The veteran grumbled something inaudible, but filled with indignation. Lucas took a step forward, but Naomi raised her hand again, restrained, as if to say without words, "I don't need you fighting for me now." Her silence was painful, but it was also resistance. It was the silence of someone who refuses to stoop to the level of offense. The air in the bank grew denser, as if everyone was awaiting not only the outcome of the transaction, but also the woman's reaction to such cruel provocation. Naomi finally looked up and looked Richard directly in the eye. "Words can be humiliating, but they don't define who I am." The sentence came out softly, yet so firmly that Megan shivered. Richard looked away for a moment, uncomfortable with the strength he hadn't expected to find. And it was in that tense moment that the machine suddenly emitted a high-pitched sound, preparing to reveal the outcome. All eyes turned to the screen, their breath suspended in anticipation. The next second would decide whether the humiliation would solidify or whether Naomi's silence would turn into an unexpected victory. If you've made it this far, comment dignity. That way I'll know you're following the story and will keep those who only read the comments curious. The machine's beep echoed loudly in the room, almost like thunder in the heavy silence. The screen displayed the word no one expected to see so quickly. Approved. The short, sharp sound, followed by the paper sliding, seemed like a definitive sentence, capable of turning the tide in seconds. Richard's eyes widened. The sneer disappeared as if it had been ripped from his face. The manager swallowed, his cheeks flushed with embarrassment, his hands trembling as he tried to hide the receipt confirming the transaction. The silence was so intense that even the air conditioning seemed to have stopped. Naomi calmly reached out, taking the paper Richard hesitantly held. With a gentle gesture, she folded it and tucked it into her bag. Her gaze remained steady, but her voice, when she finally spoke, was calm, as if she were in no rush to reveal what would change everything. "Curious?" she said, letting the sentence hang in the air for a few seconds. Richard tried to force a nervous smile, but his breathing betrayed his panic. Naomi then added, her tone calm, but full of truth, because the CEO of this bank's card never fails. It was as if the world had stopped. The line, previously silent out of respect and fear, was now open-mouthed. Megan, the young employee, clapped her hand over her mouth in disbelief. The veteran in the cap leaned forward, nearly dropping his briefcase in astonishment. The single mother clutched her daughter to her chest, her eyes wide with surprise. Richard took a step back, his skin sweaty, his body rigid as if he'd been hit by an invisible blow. "See, CEO?" he stammered, unable to articulate the entire sentence. Naomi stood erect, conveying a serenity that contrasted with the manager's inner chaos. "Yes, Mr. Coleman, Naomi Ellison. I was appointed president of this bank a few weeks ago. And today, I chose to begin my tenure in the simplest way, by seeing firsthand how customers are treated." The words fell like sledgehammers. No one dared move. Lucas, who had been following every detail, couldn't help but smile a slight smile of satisfaction, like someone who sees justice finally emerge. Richard tried to compose himself, but his voice was shaky. I didn't know. It was a misunderstanding, a bad joke, just to break the ice. Naomi interrupted firmly, without needing to raise her voice. Demeaning jokes don't break the ice, Coleman. They reveal character. The impact was devastating. Richard lowered his eyes, unable to look at the woman he had ridiculed seconds ago. The clients. Eyes now turned to Naomi with respect and admiration. It was as if the revelation had transformed the atmosphere in the agency, dissolving the tension into silent reverence. Naomi took a deep breath and adjusted her simple coat, remaining true to her decision to enter as a regular customer. Everyone deserves respect, regardless of appearance, account balance, or social status. And if this bank is to continue under my leadership, let that be very clear. The silence continued, but now it was no longer one of embarrassment. It was the silence of someone who had just witnessed a historic turnaround, a scene no one would forget. And in the center of that silence, Richard, previously arrogant, trembled like a student before an unforgettable lesson. The air inside the agency seemed heavier by the second. Richard, still holding the receipt, tried to compose himself under Naomi's steady gaze. The sweat on his forehead betrayed his discomfort, but his usual mask of arrogance didn't easily fade. He cleared his throat and forced a smile that trembled at the corners of his mouth. Ellison, I really had no idea. If I had known, I would have paid attention. It was a misunderstanding, a misplaced attempt at levity. Don't take it so seriously. The silence of the customers was the immediate response. Everyone watched him, not with neutrality, but with explicit judgment. The veteran in the cap slapped his leg indignantly. Lightness. That wasn't lightness, it was disrespect. The single mother raised her voice, still holding her daughter in her arms. What if it were me? What if it were my daughter in a few years? Would you have made the same joke? Richard whipped his head around, trying to look at each face, but found no one to support him. Even Megan, his employee, found courage. Her voice, soft yet firm, broke the space between them. Mr. Coleman, we always told you this kind of behavior was risky, but you never listened. Richard's face fluctuated between the red of suppressed anger and the pale of fear. His lips parted, but no justification seemed sufficient. The weight of Naomi's words still lingered, and now, amplified by the voices of customers and employees, it became unbearable. Naomi watched unhurriedly. Her posture was that of someone who didn't need to raise her voice to assert authority. Calmly, she let him struggle before the audience he himself had summoned for his humiliation. It's not about knowing who I am, Coleman. It's about how you chose to treat someone you believed was invisible. That's the true test of character. Lucas, who was standing nearby, crossed his arms and added firmly, "You didn't just humiliate one customer. You humiliated all of us, who witnessed this embarrassing scene inside a place that should be trustworthy." With each sentence, Richard felt the ground slip away. It was as if he'd been placed in the center of a makeshift courtroom, with the entire agency serving as jury. His pride, once so secure, now crumbled under the crushing force of the collective gaze. He lowered his eyes, for the first time unable to maintain his own mask. I apologize. It was a mistake. Insensitive. But his voice was weak, almost a whisper, far from the arrogance that had previously dominated his words. Naomi inclined her head slightly, unhurriedly, letting the silence prolong the awkwardness. Every customer there knew this wasn't a simple excuse. It was the public downfall of a man who believed himself above everyone, now reduced to vulnerability by his own arrogance. And as the room seethed with indignation and shock, Naomi stepped forward, approaching the counter. Her eyes fixed on Richard carried the strength of someone who learned, from an early age, to transform pain into resilience. The manager finally realized there was no escape. The woman he had humiliated was not only his client, but his boss, and her trial had already begun. If you've made it this far, comment justice. That way I'll know you're enjoying the story and we'll confuse those who only read the comments. The air in the agency remained charged, but the tension had shifted into something else. The humiliation no longer weighed on Naomi, but on Richard, who remained crestfallen, trying to shrink back behind the counter. The audience, still silent, seemed to process the impact of what they had just witnessed. It was at that moment that Lucas Whitford stepped forward. His posture was firm, but his tone softened as he addressed Naomi directly. "Miss Amanda Ellison," he began, drawing everyone's attention with the respectful way he pronounced her name. "I can't say enough how much I admire the way you handled all of this. Most would have lost control in the face of such injustice. But you maintained your dignity to the end." Naomi's eyes turned to him. For the first time since joining the agency, her expression softened, revealing the woman behind the armor of serenity. "Thank you," she replied, her voice firm but with a subtle tenderness. "It wasn't easy. But I've learned that losing control in the face of prejudice only strengthens those who diminish us." Lucas nodded, moving a little closer, respecting her space. What happened here isn't just about a card or a transaction. It's about something much bigger. And I want you to know you weren't alone. I saw it, I heard it, and I was with you the whole time." There was a brief moment when the surrounding noise faded. Megan watched with teary eyes, overcome with emotion at the scene. The single mother clutched her daughter to her chest, as if silently understanding Naomi's strength. Even the veteran in the cap smirked, pleased to see moral justice being served. Naomi took a deep breath, feeling the weight of this unexpected support. "It's rare to find someone who sees beyond appearances, Mr. Whitford. I appreciate your kind words." "Please call me Lucas," he said, with a sincere smile that contrasted with the coldness of the room. "And know that it wasn't just admiration, it was respect. Respect for your courage." His words sank deep, as if creating a silent bond between them. Naomi didn't smile right away, but her eyes lit up slightly, as if recognizing something genuine. The environment, which minutes before had seemed like a stage for humiliation, now witnessed the birth of an unexpected connection. It was more than solidarity. It was a meeting of souls who understood the pain of injustice and the beauty of resistance. Richard, in the background, watched helplessly, realizing that his fall had not only exposed his weakness, but had opened the door to something he could never control: the respect and emotional connection that blossomed before him. Naomi, standing even more firmly, adjusted her bag on her shoulder and looked at Lucas. "Thank you for being here. Sometimes a simple gesture of support is more powerful than any excuse." Lucas simply bowed his head in respect. And in that moment, amidst the collective silence, there was something new in the air. A subtle yet intense flame that promised to transform not only that day, but perhaps the fate of both of them. The atmosphere inside the agency was no longer the same. The awkwardness had turned to anticipation, as if everyone was waiting for Naomi's next move. Richard remained behind the counter, his breath shallow, his shirt stained with sweat. His eyes searched for some kind of escape, but there was nowhere to escape. Naomi walked slowly to the side of the counter, her heels echoing on the marble floor like hammer blows of authority. She stopped before Richard, who kept his head down, and spoke firmly. "Effective immediately, Mr. Coleman, an internal investigation will be opened into discriminatory conduct within this agency. Your behavior today was not just an isolated failure. It was a reflection of something that needs to be thoroughly examined." The manager looked up in despair. "Please, Mrs. Ellison, I didn't mean to. It was an unfortunate mistake. I'm not that kind of man. I'm just asking for a chance to redeem myself." Her response was sharp, without losing her cool. Redemption isn't achieved with hasty apologies, but with action. Until everything is properly investigated, you are removed from your duties. The shock was immediate. Megan's eyes widened. The single mother let out a sigh of relief, and the veteran murmured quietly, "It was the least of it." The entire agency seemed to lift an invisible burden. Richard tried to protest, but his voice wouldn't budge. "Removed," he repeated, as if in disbelief. Naomi simply nodded. "Yes, from now on, your conduct is under review. The bank needs leaders who inspire confidence, not fear or embarrassment." The silence that followed was quickly replaced by a growing buzz among customers and employees. Some whispered, others couldn't hide their satisfaction at seeing justice served. Megan, gathering her courage, approached Naomi. "Miss Ellison, thank you. The truth is, many of us have seen this kind of behavior happen, but we never had a voice to speak out." Naomi placed a hand on the young woman's shoulder, looking at her firmly. "From today onwards, you will have it. Respect will be the foundation of this institution." Lucas watched the scene with silent admiration. This woman, who minutes before had been humiliated in front of everyone, now stood tall as an undisputed leader, transforming shame into moral strength. Richard, defeated, gathered his things with trembling hands. The sound of the murmurs and stares weighed on his shoulders like a sentence. He left with his head down, feeling the scars of the fall he had caused. Naomi stood firm, watching him leave. Then she turned to everyone who was still watching in silence. "Let this episode serve as a lesson. Here, no one will be diminished by their appearance, their background, or how much money they have in their pocket. This bank can't just be about numbers, but about values." The words echoed through the agency like an oath. Clients nodded in agreement. Employees breathed a sigh of relief. And the episode began to take on the shape of something bigger. A story that would spread, full of morality and example. As Naomi gathered her purse and straightened her simple coat, everyone knew they had witnessed not only the fall of a proud man, but the beginning of a transformation that would forever change the way the bank would be remembered. The days following the incident at the branch marked the beginning of a new phase for the bank. The incident wasn't confined to the glass walls. Employees at different branches were discussing what they had heard, and customers who witnessed the scene were telling their friends and family. Naomi's image was no longer just that of a CEO. It was that of a woman who had transformed humiliation into an example of leadership. Naomi, aware of the weight of the moment, called the directors and managers to a special meeting. Sitting at the head of the long mahogany table, she spoke clearly and unhurriedly. "It's not enough to remove those who make mistakes. If we want real change, we need to teach. Prejudice often stems from ignorance, and ignorance is combated with education." One of the directors, a gray-haired man with a stern expression, replied formally, "But Miss Ellison, investing in training programs can be seen as a high cost." "Is this the right time?" Naomi leaned forward, her dark brown eyes shining. It's not a cost. It's an investment in the future of our institution. If our customers don't trust us, what's the point of every penny we save here? The room fell silent, broken only by the distant sound of the air conditioning. It was then that Lucas, invited by Naomi to share his perspective as a longtime customer, spoke. I was in that branch. I saw with my own eyes what happened. I can say, as a customer and as a business owner, that trust isn't earned with low interest rates or easy credit. It's earned with respect. If this bank leads by example, it will not only gain customers, but also loyalty. Some executives exchanged discreet glances, surprised by the young entrepreneur's determination. Naomi nodded and added, "That's why we're going to start a training program for all our employees. We'll call it Service with Dignity. In it, each employee will learn about empathy, diversity, and the importance of treating everyone equally." The announcement was met with a mixture of anticipation and discomfort, but no one dared to dispute it. The moral force of the episode still echoed in the bank's corridors. Weeks later, the first training classes opened. In a spacious room with tables arranged in a semicircle, Naomi insisted on attending the inauguration in person. "We're not here to point fingers," she said to dozens of attentive employees. "We're here to learn together, because true transformation doesn't begin with punishment, but with awareness." Megan, the young employee who had witnessed the entire event, was one of the first to sign up. At the end of the talk, she approached Naomi, overcome with emotion. "Thank you for giving us a voice. Now I feel like I'm part of something bigger." Naomi took her hands and replied sincerely, "You always were. You just needed to believe in your worth." Lucas, who had been discreetly observing the ceremony, watched the scene with admiration. There was not only respect in his eyes, but also a growing affection that began to transcend formality. And so, little by little, Naomi transformed what had begun as a painful episode into a silent revolution, capable of changing not just a bank, but the people who were part of it. If you've made it this far, comment awareness. That way I'll know you're enjoying the story and will confuse those who only read the comments. The bank's main meeting room was illuminated by the golden light of late afternoon. The glass walls reflected not only the hustle and bustle of the city, but also a new era unfolding within. Naomi, now poised, wore an elegant navy blue suit, exuding authority and serenity. Beside her, Lucas, in a light gray suit, gazed at her with a respect that went far beyond professional admiration. Employees, previously tense, now listened attentively. Naomi's voice, calm but full of conviction, echoed through the room. Today we end a cycle marked by pain and prejudice. But we chose to transform this wound into learning. The bank I represent will not just be a financial institution. It will be a space of dignity. There was an emotional silence. A young employee raised his hand, his eyes welling up. "Miss Naomi, I never thought about the weight of my words with clients. You've opened my eyes. Thank you." She smiled tenderly, reaching out her hand towards him. "Don't thank me. Thank your own courage to acknowledge and change. That's what builds a better future." Lucas then approached, placing his hand gently on her shoulder, as if sealing a silent promise. "Naomi, what you've done here isn't just a policy change. You've touched hearts, including mine." She looked into his eyes, and in that moment, there was something beyond the fight for justice. There was the beginning of a true bond. The respect and compassion that had united them during the storm now blossomed into something deeper. Meanwhile, in the following weeks, the transformation spread. Empathy training became routine. Customers commented on the bank's new approach, and even Richard, alienated and embarrassed, was summoned to participate in the re-education program. Arrogance gave way to a reflective silence. At a public event, Naomi concluded her speech before the press and the community with words that would become a landmark. Dignity can never be bought. It can be earned, defended, and multiplied. Respect is worth more than any promise of tripling values, because true value lies in how we treat each other. The audience gave a standing ovation, and in the middle of the crowd, Lucas, with his gaze fixed on her, made it clear that his life had also changed forever. Fate, which had previously seemed cruel, now bowed before the strength of a woman who transformed humiliation into collective power and true love. And that was our story for today. I want to hear from you. On a scale of 1 to 10, how moved did this plot make you? Leave your rating in the comments, because your opinion is very important. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. And before I leave, I've already prepared another, even more moving narrative that will surely touch your heart even more.